In this video, we are going to build our first pose, and I will teach you some tips about good posing workflow. You will find in the documentation a link to my Pinterest collection. It includes a lot of different poses from sports, martial arts that you can use to repeat this exercise. The more you will do, the better you will get. It's perfectly fine to use drawing references whenever you are creating your poses or searching for references for your animation. But for this exercise, I advise you to use a photo. Because if you are using drawing references or illustration, there is big chance that the artist has already pushed the pose, like on this one, for example. So again, I truly encourage you to watch as much illustration and drawing as possible, even try to reproduce those poses, but for the sake of learning, I think it's better to use photo references. Here is the first pose we are going to work on. You will find the link in the documentation. Here is what we have to look for whenever we start working on a new pose. First of all, the line of action. In this case, it's super obvious. It goes from the right foot to the head. So we definitely need to define this line of action in our posing. Then I'm looking for secondary shapes. Look at the flow in the arms. It creates a nice S shape with the shoulders aligned. Then I'm looking at the leg flow, creating a nice angle with the body. And finally, the torso creates this nice and smooth curve. So those lines are the ones we need to identify and clearly define in our posing. Other thing I like to do on my references is try to define the orientation of the main features of the body, especially the torso. I will quickly draw some lines that defines the orientation of the torso and its main shape, as if I was sketching the current pose. The simple thing of doing this is writing in my brain what I will have to look for. So whenever you are using a reference, just draw some line on top of it, trying to identify the shoulder orientation, the eye orientation, and the torso orientation. Let's get started and prepare our file. I'm starting where we left with our run cycle finished, and I will search for the keying action in the action editor. I will duplicate this action with our character in a rest pose and rename it O4 pose number 1. Don't forget to click the shield icon, I've just forgotten to do it. Then on my second 3D view, I will rework the shading and set it to flat, object color, get rid of cavity and shadows, so that I get a raw silhouette of my character. I will go back to my main 3D view, and in object mode, I will press Shift A to add a camera. Now the camera should appear in the outliner on the root of the scene collection. With my 3D viewport view aligned with the front of the character, I will press Ctrl Alt plus 0 on the numpad to set this as being the camera view. I will clean the camera transform channel so that there is no offset on the X-axis location and no rotation but on the X-axis. I will hover over my second 3D view and press 0 to switch to camera view. And then instead of the outliner, I will open the image editor and load the reference. You will find it in the files. Or you can download it from Pinterest or download any other reference if you want to work on another reference. Now what I'm doing is positioning the camera. I'm having a look to the reference, and it seems that the person taking the picture is slightly higher than the character. As we can see, the top of the shoulders and the top of the head of the character. So from a side view, I will slightly raise the camera to 1.4 meters. I will push it toward the character and reduce a bit the focal length to 40 millimeters to get a wider angle. We will revise the camera a bit later on if needed. The last thing I will do is go back to my rig, press Ctrl Tab to switch to pose mode. I will go to the rig properties panel, search for head follow and neck follow, set the neck follow to 1 and the head follow to 0. That's a personal preference, but I feel like my characters generally have a better behavior with the neck following the chest and the head being free of any rotation hierarchy. For me, the most important controllers whenever you are posing a character that is on the ground are the torso controller and the feet. And the torso controller or center of gravity controller is the main and most important controller whatever the pose you are doing. So the first thing you have to do is pose the torso controller. I'm lowering it and I'm rotating it to the side on its local Z-axis by pressing R and Z twice, so that I can manipulate the controller in its local space, since by default my pivot point is set to global. Then the most important controllers are the feet controllers. I'm using inverse kinematic as usual, and I'm manipulating those controllers on the Y and X axis so that they stick to the ground. Before even watching the whole shapes of the leg, I'm watching the orientation of the feet. One of the big benefits of 3D animation is that we can focus on each feature of the character one by one. So I first make sure that my feet are properly oriented and properly matching the reference. Then, as we need to adjust the torso shape, just make sure that you use at 90% the center of gravity or the torso root controller, and then slightly tweak the chest and hips by rotating them. As I'm still working on the chest, hips, and torso controller, just look at the knees. I've also posed the pole target so that the right leg knee point a bit inward toward the camera, while the left leg knee point a bit on the outside. At the end of the posing, almost every single controller of the character will be posed. As any form of art, there is a lot of back and forth. You need to watch your character from every angle to make sure that it looks good. Since the legs and the torso of my character are more or less posed, I can now rework a bit the camera position. I press Ctrl Tab to get out of pose mode, and then I can click the outer edges of the camera view to select it. Then from this view you can press G and Z twice to zoom in and out, or press R and the axis of your choice to rotate the camera. I've slightly lowered the camera as it was too high and rotated it so that I can nicely frame the character. Here you can see the actual transform values of the camera. From the camera view I can slightly adjust the center of gravity position and also work a bit on the hips controller. Note that the hips controller will have a lot of impact on your leg's shape. Watch for the groin alignment and the chest alignment of the reference. You can see it's leaning a bit forward. So I'm adjusting it accordingly. As for live drawing, watch your reference as often as possible. Don't over-focus on your character and forget that you have to check the reference. Once I feel like I have a good pose, I will check my center of gravity by checking my character from the bottom and checking the feet alignment compared to the center of gravity, or from a side view. And it feels like my character is a bit out of balance. His center of gravity is a bit too far on his back. So I feel like the character will fall on his bottom. To fix this, I simply need to push the center of gravity a bit forward. This is why it's very important to check your pose from every angle, because this is something I wouldn't be able to see through the camera view only. 3D posing is like 3D sculpting, and you won't be sculpting a character without turning around it most of the time. And this is also why sculpting and drawing, while they are not mandatory, will make you a better animator, because you will learn to better pose your characters. One thing I've noticed is that I've rotated the neck too much forward. As being a continuity of the spine that goes through the chest, try to keep your neck slightly aligned with the chest for a better flow. And then I can rotate the head to try to match the final pose. I didn't work on the shoulder or the arm on purpose so that we can focus on legs and torso. Don't hesitate to hide the arms to read the pose. Your brain will do the job of figuring out where the arms should be, and you can have a clear view of your current pose. So I can now pose the arm, I will display them again, and I will start with the shoulders. The shoulders are clearly raised on the character, so I will rotate them, and then I will start posing the left arm. When posing the forearm, do remember that your elbow can rotate only on one axis, the local Z axis. So whenever I need to change the orientation of the arm, I will twist the arm controller, not the forearm controller. And then I pose my character following the chain of hierarchy. First the shoulder, then the arm, and finally the forearm. Then I will work on the other arm, and when I've run the reference analysis, I've tried to figure where the elbow was beneath those clothes, so that I can then select the arm controller and twist it accordingly so that the elbow is pointing down. Then, as usual, I will go down the chain and pose the hand so that it's slightly open toward the sky. From there, I can turn around my character and spot that the arm is not aligned with the shoulder, and it generates a weird angle that doesn't look good and that is not anatomically correct. If you hold your shoulder and try to rotate your arm backward with your elbow pointing down, you won't be able to reach this angle. So I will fix a bit the pose. And now look at the flow between the two arms. Most of the time you want your arms to flow in a nice curve. You may think of your arms building a second line of action in a way. We are almost done. Now I'm just double checking the different features. You can see that my head orientation doesn't match the reference. So rotating a bit the neck and the head, I can adjust it. It's also a good idea to pose a bit the eyes. Just check both controllers on top of the eyebrows. By simply moving them, you will be able to set pre-made shapes for the eyebrows that will allow you to reach appealing pose pretty quickly. As I'm almost done with the pose, I'm double checking the different features, slightly repositioning the foot and reorienting them, and I will spot another problem regarding the relationship between the left shoulder and the left arm. This angle here is impossible to reach between the shoulder and the arm. Basically, with your shoulder at rest, you can't have your elbow getting upper than the shoulder. As soon as you want to rotate the arm beyond the T-pose, the rotation is done by the shoulder, creating a nice straight line between the shoulder and the arm. So this is really something you have to remember. Don't forget that the arm rotation has a lot of limitation and you need to compensate with the shoulder. That's a beginner mistake I see a lot. So I can fix this issue and now pose the hands. One of the most important controller regarding the hand is the palm controller. This is this little controller on the side of the hand. When rotating it, it will curl the hand with a nice fall off between the different palm bones. First beginner mistake to absolutely avoid. Hands are never flat unless you are pushing on a wall. So please always input a bit of rotation in this palm controller. As for the elbow and the arms, the fingers have limitation in their rotation. But remember that your finger root can tilt a bit or rotate side to side. They can curl, but they can't really twist. When it comes to next joint into your fingers, which are manipulated using the second controller here, they should only be able to curl. So while everything is possible in animation, try to match those anatomical constraints whenever you are posing your character. Then, while moving, we may need to bend the limbs of our character in a weird way just to follow the flow of the animation. But currently, just try to respect anatomical constraints. Now regarding the finger pose, look at how they are grouped. The index and the middle finger are linked together, while the ring finger is slightly getting away, and the pinky is the one that is the most on the outside and opening the hand. Finally, don't hesitate to change the location of the controller too. You can move them by grabbing them if you feel like the rig is breaking or you can't reach the pose you are currently looking at. There is no rule of thumb whenever you are posing the hand. More seriously, while I'm pushing you to follow the constraint of the body whenever you are posing your character, what's matter is the shape. So if you can't reach the correct shape for the fingers using an anatomically correct behavior with the controllers, just cheat and move them a bit. Even if those controllers are called bones, they don't behave like a real-life skeleton. Plus, you have to take in account the flesh, the muscle, the fat on top of the body that will currently shape your character. So just move them as you want so that you can reach the nice pose. While I do advise you to follow anatomical constraint, if you can't reach the pose you want, just cheat a bit. So my advice is to always follow anatomical constraint, especially if the rig is built on them, which is more or less the case with this rig. But the most important thing is the result. This is what your customer, the viewer, will see. So if you need, cheat with the rig to get to the right result. An example here, I'm using this ankle tweaker just to break a bit the hard angle I have on the ankle that doesn't look right. This is not anatomically correct, that will be pretty painful, but in the end it looks a bit better. So with small adjustment we can call this posing done. In the next video we are going to see how we can push this pose to make it even more appealing.